The champagne-colored leaves crunched under Rafe Calder's Italian leather shoes. His black suit absorbed the autumn sunlight, filtering through the oak trees lining Brookhaven's most expensive park. Beside him, Selene Hart's manicured nails dug into the crook of his elbow like she was holding a trophy she'd fought years to win. Around them, joggers pretended not to stare. Mothers pushing strollers slowed their pace. Everyone recognized the face that controlled half the East Coast's underground, the man whose name alone could end careers, ruin families, or erase problems that the law refused to touch. But today, Rafe wanted to believe he was just a man taking a walk. Selene smiled at a passing couple. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect lie. She squeezed his arm tighter. The Delaney fundraiser is next month. I've already confirmed our attendance with the governor's wife. Rafe nodded without listening. His engagement to Selene wasn't built on love, it was architecture. Strategic, clean, a fortress made of political connections and old money that would keep his empire stable and his enemies at bay. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Selene's voice dripped honey over steel. Are you even listening to me? Before Rafe could answer, a scent hit him like a freight train derailing at full speed. Vanilla, lavender, something sweeter underneath, milk and warmth and safety he hadn't smelled in 3 years. His body recognized it before his brain could catch up. Every nerve ending fired at once. His alpha instincts surged so violently his vision sharpened, his hearing amplified, his pulse hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break free. Rafe stopped walking. Selene stumbled forward, her grip slipping. What are you? But Rafe wasn't looking at her anymore. 20 feet ahead, near a bench under a sprawling oak tree, stood a figure that shouldn't exist. Worn brown coat, faded jeans, hands trembling as they gripped the handle of a triple stroller, and a belly round, heavy, unmistakably pregnant. The man's face turned slightly, catching the light. Rafe's chest locked up. Dark brown skin, tired eyes, hair longer than it used to be, falling in messy waves over a face that used to smile at him like he was the only person in the world worth knowing. Kairo Vale. His ex. The Omega he'd loved so completely, it nearly destroyed him. And beside Kairo, tucked inside that stroller, 3 tiny faces slept in a row, mouths slightly open, fingers curled, breathing soft and steady like they didn't know the world could hurt them yet. Triplets. Rafe's legs moved before his mind gave permission. 1 step, 2, his pulse roared in his ears. The scent grew stronger, undeniable now. Those pups smelled like him. His blood, his line, his children. Selene's voice cut through the haze. Rafe, what is this? But Rafe couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from the man who'd vanished from his life 3 years ago without explanation, without warning, without a trace. Kairo's head lifted slowly, his eyes locked onto Rafe's. And the entire world tilted sideways. Rafe's throat tightened, his voice came out rough, broken. Kairo. The Omega flinched like the sound of his name was a blade slicing through old scar tissue. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Not a whisper, not a breath, nothing. Kairo's hand flew to his throat, fingers pressing against skin like he was trying to force words that wouldn't come. His eyes filled with something worse than tears, terror mixed with shame mixed with rage, so deep it looked like drowning. Rafe took another step forward. Kairo stepped back, positioning himself between Rafe and the stroller, protective, defensive, a silent warning written across every line of his body. Selene's nails scraped against Rafe's wrist. You didn't tell me your ex would be here, in public, with children. Her voice was sweet enough to fool strangers, but Rafe heard the poison underneath. He pulled his arm free without looking at her. His gaze stayed locked on Kairo, on the trembling hands, on the rounded belly, on the 3 sleeping pups who didn't know their father was standing 6 feet away, drowning in questions that had no answers. Rafe's voice dropped to a whisper, are they mine? Kairo's expression shattered. Pain, heartbreak, fury, regret, all of it collided at once behind eyes that used to look at Rafe like he was worth saving. Then Kairo reached into his coat pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. Rafe took it. His hands were shaking too. What secret is written on that paper that's about to destroy everything Rafe thought he knew? The paper felt heavier than it should. Rafe's fingers brushed against Kairo's for half a second, skin on skin, warmth against cold, and the contact sent a shock through his system like touching a live wire. Kairo yanked his hand back like he'd been burned. Rafe unfolded the paper slowly. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard it hurt. Medical records, a birth certificate draft, and stapled to the back, a restraining order. The words blurred together at first, then they came into sharp, brutal focus. Father Rafe Calder. Date of birth Triplets, March 14, 2024. Applicant Kairo Vale. Restraining order filed against Selene Hart. The ground disappeared beneath Rafe's feet. He read it again, then again. The letters didn't change, the names didn't shift. The truth sat there on cheap printer paper, undeniable and absolute. Selene Hart. His fiancée. The woman whose arm he'd been holding 2 minutes ago. The restraining order named her as a threat to Kairo and the children. Rafe's blood turned to ice in his veins. Selene's voice shattered the silence. That's ridiculous. She laughed, high, sharp, wrong. He's lying. You think some mute Omega can just show up with Barbies and trap you? Rafe's head snapped toward her. Her face had gone pale for just a heartbeat, then it hardened like concrete setting. Her smile stretched too wide, too perfect, like a mask that didn't fit right anymore. Kairo's shoulders shook. Tears slid down his cheeks in silence. No sobs, no sound, just water on skin. He lifted his phone with trembling hands. Pressed a button. And suddenly Selene's voice filled the air. Cold, sharp, cruel. If you keep the pups, you'll ruin him. You'll ruin the Calder name. You will lose your voice, Omega, and nobody will believe you anyway. The recording echoed through the park like a bomb, dropping in slow motion. Rafe's vision tunneled. His hands went numb. The paper crumpled in his grip. Around them, people stopped walking. Joggers froze mid-stride. A woman covered her mouth. A man pulled out his phone and started recording. The world was watching. And Selene's voice kept playing. Don't think Rafe will protect you. He'll choose power over you every time. Rafe's breath stopped. The recording continued, but he couldn't hear it anymore. Blood roared in his ears. His pulse hammered so loud it drowned out everything except the truth slamming into him like a wrecking ball. She'd done this. Selene had found Kairo, threatened him, hurt him. And Rafe hadn't known. Hadn't protected him. Hadn't even looked for him. Selene lunged forward, her composure shattering like glass hitting concrete. Turn that off. She reached for Kairo's phone. But Rafe moved faster. His hand shot out and caught Selene's wrist midair. His grip was iron, not enough to break bone, but enough to stop her cold. Her eyes went wide, shock, panic, fear. Good. Rafe leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that promised violence without delivering it yet. I understand perfectly. His words were slow, deliberate, each one a nail in a coffin. You hurt him. Selene's mask cracked wide open. Her lips curled into something ugly. He was going to ruin you, she spat. He was an Omega mistake. You're an Alpha King. You were supposed to belong to someone worthy, someone like me. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Around them, phones were up now, recording, capturing, broadcasting. Kairo's tears fell harder, faster, his body shaking with silent sobs that had no sound to carry them. Rafe's chest tightened so hard, he thought his ribs might crack. He turned to Kairo slowly. His expression softened, something raw and broken rising to the surface that he hadn't let anyone see in years. Why didn't you come to me? His voice cracked on the last word. Kairo swallowed hard. His hands shook as he pulled up another file on his phone and turned the screen toward Rafe. A message thread. Rafe's phone number at the top. Message after message sent from Kairo's side. Delivered, no. Delivered, no. Delivered, no. Every single one blocked. Rafe's stomach dropped. How deep does Selene's betrayal go, and what else has she been hiding? Kairo's fingers moved across the phone screen, pulling up more evidence with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for months. Maybe years. A screenshot appeared, then another, then another. Rafe's vision blurred as he tried to process what he was seeing. Bank transfers, clinic receipts, a signature on a relocation order. All bearing Selene's name. Or her assistant's name. Or her lawyer's name. But the money trail led back to one source, Selene Hart. She'd paid a clinic. She'd bribed nurses. She'd signed documents authorizing Kairo's medical records to be sealed. And at the bottom of one page, in cold, clinical language that made Rafe's blood boil, was a procedure note. Vocal cord trauma, irreversible damage, patient unable to produce sound. Rafe's hands started shaking. Kairo had a voice 3 years ago. A soft, stubborn voice that used to laugh at Rafe's terrible jokes and call him out when he was being an ass. Now there was nothing. Just silence. Because Selene had taken it from him. Rafe's gaze snapped to Selene. His voice came out low, dangerous, barely controlled. You did this. It wasn't a question. Selene's face twisted. He was in the way, she screamed. You were building an empire and he was dragging you down. I saved you. Her voice carried across the park. People were staring now, some horrified, some fascinated, all of them recording. Rafe dropped Selene's wrist like it was covered in filth. She stumbled back, her perfectly styled hair falling loose around her face. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked small. Powerless. Human. Rafe turned back to Kairo. His chest ached with a pain sharper than any bullet wound. I should have looked for you, he said quietly. I should have trusted you. I should have protected you. Kairo's eyes searched Rafe's face like he was looking for lies, for manipulation, for cruelty. But all he found was regret. Raw, honest, unbearable. Rafe took a slow step toward the stroller. His movements were careful, deliberate, like he was approaching something sacred he didn't deserve to touch. The triplets were still asleep, tiny faces peaceful in the afternoon light. One of them stirred slightly, making a soft noise that punched straight through Rafe's chest. He knelt down beside the stroller. His hands hovered over the edge, not quite touching. Then one of the pups, the smallest one, with dark curls and skin the same shade as Kairo's, opened his eyes. Grey eyes, storm cloud grey. Rafe's eyes. The pup's tiny hand reached out, fingers stretching toward Rafe's face. And then those impossibly small fingers wrapped around Rafe's index finger and held on. The world stopped. Rafe's throat closed up, his vision blurred, his entire body locked in place like someone had hit pause on his life. This was his son. His child. His blood. And he'd missed everything. The birth, the first cry, the first smile, the first time those tiny hands reached for something and held on. Rafe's voice came out broken, I'm your father. The words felt too big for his mouth. And I swear, no one will ever hurt you again. Behind him, Selene let out a scream that sounded like glass shattering. You can't do this. Rafe, you're throwing away everything for him. Rafe stood slowly. The pup's hand slipped from his finger, but the warmth stayed behind like a brand. He turned to face Selene. His expression was calm now, the kind of calm that came before storms, before earthquakes, before everything fell apart. No, he said quietly. I'm taking everything back. What will Rafe do next, and how far will Selene go to stop him? Selene's chest heaved. Her perfectly applied makeup was starting to crack around the edges, mascara smudging, lipstick fading, foundation showing stress lines she usually hid with Botox and lies. She looked at the crowd gathering around them, at the phones pointed in her direction, at the evidence still glowing on Kairo's screen. Then she did what powerful people always do when cornered. She attacked. This is absurd, she said, voice rising with manufactured outrage. He's manipulating you, Rafe, can't you see? He shows up out of nowhere with Barbies and a sad story, and suddenly you're ready to throw away everything we've built. Her tone shifted, softer now, pleading. I was protecting you, from scandal, from ruin, from an Omega who would have destroyed your reputation. Rafe's jaw tightened, my reputation. He repeated the words slowly, like he was tasting something rotten. You took his voice, you stole my children, you built a cage around me and called it protection. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. That's not love, Selene, that's ownership. Selene's face twisted. The mask was gone now, nothing left but rage and desperation. You think he's better than me, she hissed. He's weak, he's nothing, he can't even speak. Kairo flinched like he'd been slapped. But he didn't back down. Instead, he stepped forward, positioning himself directly in front of Rafe. His hand moved to his phone again, pulling up one more file. A video this time. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from a security camera angle, a hospital hallway, timestamp 3 years ago. On screen, a younger Kairo sat in a waiting room chair, one hand pressed to his stomach, barely showing, maybe 3 months pregnant. He looked exhausted, scared, alone. Then Selene walked into frame. Her voice was clear even through the cheap speakers. You need to disappear, Kairo, for Rafe's sake, for your sake. If you love him, you'll leave. Kairo shook his head on screen, lips forming words the camera couldn't capture. Selene leaned closer. If you don't leave willingly, I'll make sure you can't come back, ever. The video cut to black. Then a new clip appeared. Same hospital, different angle. Kairo being wheeled into surgery, paperwork in a nurse's hand, a signature that wasn't his. And when he came out hours later, his hand went to his throat. His mouth opened. Nothing. The video ended. Rafe's hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists to make it stop. Around them, the crowd had gone silent. Even the joggers had stopped pretending they weren't watching. A woman was crying. A man looked sick. Selene's face had gone ghost white. That's, she started, then stopped. Her mouth opened and closed like she was drowning on dry land. That's not what, Rafe's voice was quiet, deadly, not illegal, not cruel, not everything you actually are underneath the designer clothes and fake smiles. Selene's eyes darted around the park, like she was looking for an escape route. There wasn't one. Every exit was blocked by people holding phones, by witnesses, by truth she couldn't buy or threaten her way out of. She turned back to Rafe one last time. You'll regret this, she whispered. Rafe's expression didn't change. The only thing I regret is not seeing you for what you were 3 years ago. He pulled his phone from his pocket and made a call. It rang once. Dante, Rafe said calmly, I need federal investigators at Brookhaven Park, now, and bring copies of everything we have on Selene Hart, financial records, communications, contracts, all of it. Selene's face went from white to grey. You can't. I can, Rafe said, and I will. He ended the call. Sirens started wailing in the distance. Will justice finally catch up to Selene, or does she have one more card to play? The sirens grew louder, closer. People in the park started backing up, giving space, forming a loose circle around the scene like they were watching a play they couldn't look away from. Selene's breathing quickened. Her eyes darted between Rafe, Kairo, the stroller, and the approaching flashing lights. For the first time in her life, she had no plan. No backup. No escape. She lunged toward Kairo one last time, desperation making her reckless. You ruined everything, she screamed. You were supposed to disappear. But Rafe moved faster. He stepped between them, his body a wall Selene couldn't cross. His voice was ice. Touch him again, and I'll forget I ever tried to be civilized. Selene froze. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the park entrance. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out, federal agents, judging by the badges clipped to their belts. Behind them, a second car, Rafe's men. Dante stepped out first, a thick manila folder in his hands. He walked straight to Rafe and handed it over without a word. Rafe opened the folder. Inside were copies of everything Kairo had shown him on the phone, plus more. Financial records showing payments to clinics, lawyers, and private security firms. Emails between Selene and her assistant discussing the Omega problem. Text messages detailing plans to relocate Kairo to a city 3 states away where Rafe would never find him. And at the bottom, a signed contract with a private hospital authorizing an unauthorized medical procedure on a patient who couldn't consent. Rafe closed the folder and handed it to the lead investigator. Selene Hart, the investigator said, voice flat and professional. You're under arrest for medical coercion, bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Selene's knees buckled. No, this isn't. The investigator continued reading her rights, while two agents moved forward with handcuffs. Selene thrashed, Rafe, please, you don't understand, I did this for us. Rafe didn't look at her. He was already turning back to Kairo. The Omega stood frozen beside the stroller, tears still streaming down his face, hands pressed to his mouth like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Rafe knelt down in front of him. Not as an alpha asserting dominance. As a man asking forgiveness. I failed you, Rafe said quietly. I should have known, I should have searched, I should have questioned everything the moment you disappeared. Kairo's shoulders shook. Rafe reached up slowly, giving him time to pull away. But Kairo didn't. Rafe's hand cupped Kairo's face, thumb brushing away tears that wouldn't stop falling. I can't take back the last 3 years, Rafe whispered, but I can give you the rest of my life, if you'll let me. Kairo's eyes searched his face one more time. Then slowly, he nodded. It was the smallest movement, barely there. But it was enough. Behind them, Selene screamed as the agents dragged her toward the waiting car. You think you've won. You don't know what you've unleashed. You'll regret this, Rafe. You'll. The car door slammed shut, cutting off her voice mid-sentence. The crowd erupted into whispers. Phones were still recording. The footage would be on every news site within the hour. But Rafe didn't care. He stood slowly, never breaking eye contact with Kairo. Then he looked down at the stroller, where 3 tiny lives slept peacefully, unaware that their world had just changed forever. One of the pups stirred, the same one who'd grabbed Rafe's finger earlier. His little face scrunched up, and he let out a small cry. Kairo moved immediately, reaching for the stroller. But Rafe's hand covered his. Let me, Rafe said softly. Kairo hesitated, then stepped back. Rafe carefully lifted the crying pup from the stroller, cradling him against his chest with the kind of gentle confidence that didn't come from practice, it came from instinct. The pup quieted immediately. His tiny hand curled into Rafe's shirt. And for the first time in 3 years, Rafe felt like he could breathe again. What happens next when the cameras stop rolling and reality sets in? The pup's breath was warm against Rafe's chest. Tiny fingers gripped his shirt like it was the only solid thing in a world that wouldn't stop spinning. Kairo watched with eyes that held 3 years of walls built brick by brick. His hand hovered near the stroller, protective, uncertain, like he was waiting for this moment to collapse into another nightmare. Rafe shifted the pup carefully, supporting the small head with one hand. His voice came out rough. What's his name? Kairo's lips moved, no sound followed. His hands lifted instead, fingers spelling out letters in the air slowly. M-A-L-I-K. Rafe's throat tightened. Malik. He looked down at the sleeping face, at the grey eyes that had opened briefly, at the tiny nose and perfect fingers and the way this child, his son, fit against him like he'd always belonged there. And the others. Kairo's hands moved again. Z-A-I and J-A-L-E-N. 3 names, 3 lives, 3 years of missed moments that Rafe would never get back. Around them, the crowd was finally starting to disperse. The federal agents had driven away with Selene locked in the back seat. Dante stood near the park entrance, phone pressed to his ear, already handling whatever damage control needed handling. But none of that mattered right now. Rafe carefully placed Malik back in the stroller, making sure the blanket was tucked around him properly. Then he straightened and looked at Kairo, really looked at him. The exhaustion carved into his face, the worn coat that had seen too many winters, the trembling hands that never quite stopped shaking. And the belly, round and heavy, with another life growing inside. Rafe's chest ached. When are you due? Kairo pulled out his phone and typed quickly. 6 weeks. Rafe's jaw clenched. 6 weeks. Kairo was 6 weeks away from giving birth alone, again. Where have you been staying? Kairo's fingers hesitated over the screen, then he typed. Shelter downtown, sometimes friends couches, nowhere permanent. The words hit Rafe like physical blows. A shelter. While carrying his child. While raising 3 others. while trying to survive in a city that chewed up vulnerable people and spit them out. Rafe's voice dropped to something dangerous. Why didn't you fight harder to reach me? It was the wrong question. He knew it the second the words left his mouth. Kairo's expression hardened. His fingers flew across the phone screen, typing faster now, anger fueling each word. I tried for months. Your number was blocked. Your office turned me away. Your security threatened me. I went to your building 7 times. 7. They said you'd given orders not to let me through. They said you'd moved on. They said you never wanted to see me again. Rafe felt sick. Kairo kept typing. Selene made sure I couldn't reach you. She paid people, changed records, had me followed. When I was 5 months pregnant, her men showed up at my apartment and told me to leave the city or they'd make sure I lost the Barbies. So I left because I couldn't risk them. The phone screen shook in Kairo's hands. I lost my voice trying to scream for help when they held me down in that clinic. I lost my job because I couldn't speak. I lost my apartment because I couldn't afford rent. I lost everything except them. He gestured to the stroller. So don't ask me why I didn't fight harder. I fought until there was nothing left to fight with. Rafe's hands curled into fists, so tight his knuckles went white. He'd been so focused on building his empire, on securing power, on playing the game Selene had convinced him was necessary, that he'd missed the war being waged against the only person who'd ever mattered. I'm sorry, the words felt pathetically small, useless, inadequate. But they were all he had. Kairo's eyes filled with tears again. He wiped them away roughly, angry at himself for showing weakness. Rafe stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. I can't change the past, he said quietly, but I can change what happens next. You and the kids, you're coming home with me, today, right now. Kairo shook his head hard, backing away. His hands moved frantically across the phone. I'm not your charity case. You're not charity, Rafe's voice was firm. You're the father of my children. You're. He stopped, the word caught in his throat. Kairo stared at him, waiting. You're the only person I ever loved, Rafe finished quietly. The confession hung in the air between them like something fragile and dangerous. Kairo's breath hitched. His eyes searched Rafe's face for lies, for manipulation, for the cruelty he'd learned to expect from everyone else. But all he found was raw honesty. And maybe that was worse, because honesty meant hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Can Kairo trust the man who failed to protect him, or will history repeat itself? 2 black SUVs pulled up to the park entrance. Dante approached, his expression carefully neutral. Everything's arranged. The estate is ready whenever you are. Rafe nodded without taking his eyes off Kairo. The Omega stood frozen, one hand on the stroller, the other pressed protectively to his belly. His face was a war zone of conflicting emotions, hope battling fear, exhaustion fighting survival instinct. Rafe understood. Trust wasn't something you could demand. It was earned through action, not words. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Rafe said quietly. I'm asking you to let me prove I'm different than I was 3 years ago. Kairo's jaw tightened. His fingers moved across his phone screen. What if you're not? What if this is temporary? What if you wake up tomorrow and decide we're too complicated? Then you leave, Rafe's voice was steady. The estate will be in your name, the money will be in your account. You'll have security, medical care, everything you need. No strings, no conditions. If you want to walk away after a week, a month, a year, you can. Kairo's eyes widened slightly. Rafe continued, but I'm betting you won't, because I'm betting that somewhere under all the hurt and anger, you remember what we had before Selene destroyed it. A long silence stretched between them. One of the triplets started crying, then another, then all 3, like they'd coordinated their protests. Kairo moved immediately, reaching into the stroller to comfort them. But Rafe was already there. Lifting Jerry carefully while Kairo picked up Jalen, Malik continued crying until Kairo's free hand rocked the stroller gently. They worked in sync without speaking, natural, automatic, like they'd done this 1,000 times before even though this was the first. Dante cleared his throat softly. So we should move, media trucks are 3 blocks out. Rafe looked at Kairo, your choice, but whatever you decide, decide now. Kairo stared at the stroller, at the tiny faces that depended on him for everything. at the swollen belly that made every decision twice as heavy. Then he looked at Rafe holding Jerry like she was made of glass and gold. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in exhaustion that had finally found a place to rest. He nodded once. Rafe exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 3 years. Let's go home. The drive to Rafe's estate took 20 minutes through tree-lined streets that gradually shed their city skin for something greener, quieter, safer. Kairo sat in the back seat with the triplets, his hands never leaving the car seats he'd strapped them into. His eyes tracked every turn, every street sign, every landmark, memorizing escape routes even as he accepted the help. Old habits died hard. The estate gates opened smoothly. The driveway curved through manicured lawns and old oak trees that had been there longer than the house. The mansion itself was understated wealth, brick and stone and tall windows that caught the afternoon light, no gold fixtures or marble columns, just solid, permanent safe. Kairo's eyes went wide. Rafe noticed, "It's too much, I know, but there's a guest house in the back that's smaller, more private, if you'd prefer." Kairo was already shaking his head. He typed on his phone. "The main house is fine, closer to help if something goes wrong." The practicality of the statement hit Rafe hard. Kairo wasn't thinking about luxury or comfort. He was thinking about survival, about what happened if he went into labor early, about backup plans and worst-case scenarios. Because that's what 3 years of fighting alone taught you. They unloaded the stroller carefully. Dante's team had already brought in supplies, diapers, formula, clothes, toys, everything organized and ready like they'd been preparing for this moment. Maybe they had been, maybe some part of Rafe had always known this day would come. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and fresh flowers. The staff had been dismissed for the day. Rafe had made sure of that. No strangers, no audience, just space to breathe. Kairo stood in the foyer, looking small and out of place in his worn coat and faded jeans. Rafe wanted to wrap him in something soft and expensive and safe, but he knew better. Kairo didn't need saving, he needed support. There was a difference. "Second floor," Rafe said quietly. 3 bedrooms connected by a shared bathroom. Nursery is already set up. I had it done 2 years ago when." He stopped. Kairo's eyes sharpened. He typed. "When what?" Rafe's throat tightened. "When I finally accepted that you weren't coming back, I built it anyway, just in case." The confession hung in the air. Kairo stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and pushed the stroller toward the stairs. Rafe moved to help, but Kairo waved him off. He could do this himself. He'd been doing it himself for 3 years. Will Kairo's walls finally come down, or is Rafe's second chance already slipping away? The nursery was perfect. 3 cribs lined up against the wall, each one painted soft white with matching mobiles hanging overhead, rocking chair by the window, changing table stocked with supplies, soft rugs covering hardwood floors. It looked like hope built into furniture. Kairo stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to his mouth, tears streaming down his face again. Rafe stayed back, giving him space. "I know it's not enough," Rafe said quietly. "I know furniture doesn't fix what I let happen, but it's a start." Kairo walked slowly into the room. His fingers traced the edge of one crib, then another. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. The triplets had fallen asleep in the stroller during the car ride, small miracles in a day full of chaos. Rafe moved carefully, lifting Malik first and placing him gently in the center crib, then Jerry, then Jalen. They barely stirred, exhausted from crying, from change, from a world that had shifted under their tiny feet without warning. Kairo stood watching, his hand pressed to his belly where another life kicked and turned. Rafe straightened and turned to face him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rafe did something he hadn't done since the day Kairo disappeared. He dropped to his knees. Right there in the nursery, on the soft rug where his children would learn to crawl someday. He looked up at Kairo with everything stripped bare, no armor, no walls, no alpha pride. Just a man who'd failed and was begging for a chance to do better. "I should have known," Rafe said, voice breaking. "I should have questioned why you left. I should have torn the city apart looking for you instead of believing the lie Selene fed me that you'd moved on." Kairo's tears fell harder. "I should have trusted my instincts. My body knew something was wrong. my alpha knew, but I ignored it because I was too focused on keeping power instead of protecting what actually mattered. Rafe's hands trembled in his lap. I can't take back the last 3 years. I can't give you back your voice. I can't erase the nights you spent alone and scared while carrying our children. But I can swear to you, on everything I am, everything I have, that I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that way again. Kairo's knees buckled. He sank down to the floor, bringing himself level with Rafe. His hands moved to his phone, but Rafe caught them gently. You don't have to say anything, Rafe whispered. Just let me prove it. Let me show you that I'm not the man who let you down. Let me be the father these kids deserve, the partner you deserved 3 years ago. Kairo's breath came in ragged gasps. His eyes were red and swollen and filled with 3 years of pain. But underneath all that pain was something else. Something that hadn't died despite everything. Love. Broken and battered and barely alive. But still there. Kairo's hands pulled free from Rafe's grip, not in rejection, but to move. His fingers lifted slowly to Rafe's face, trembling as they touched his jaw, his cheek, his temple. Like he was memorizing the shape of him. Like he was checking to make sure this was real and not another dream that would collapse when he opened his eyes. Rafe stayed perfectly still, letting Kairo take what he needed. Then Kairo's hand moved to his own chest, pressing flat over his heart. Then to Rafe's chest, mirroring the gesture. A wordless question. Are you sure? Can I trust this? Will you break me again? Rafe covered Kairo's hand with his own, pressing it firmly against his heartbeat. I'm sure, he whispered. I'll earn it back, every day, for as long as it takes. Kairo's eyes closed, fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. Then, slowly, he nodded. It was the smallest movement, barely there. But it was permission. A fragile, terrifying yes. Rafe pulled him carefully into his arms, mindful of the belly between them. Kairo collapsed against his chest, silent sobs shaking his entire body. Behind them, one of the triplets stirred and let out a soft whimper. Both of them moved at the same time, instinct overriding everything else. Kairo reached the crib first, his hand gently rocking it until the whimpering stopped. Rafe stood beside him, close enough to help but not crowding. And for the first time in 3 years, they stood together. Parents, partners, 2 people trying to rebuild something that had been shattered. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't healed. But it was a beginning. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried and new threats emerge? 3 weeks later, Selene's face was everywhere. News broadcasts, social media, think pieces analyzing her crimes frame by frame. The recording Kairo had played in the park had gone viral within hours. By the next morning, every major outlet was running stories about the society woman who terrorized a pregnant Omega and tried to steal a Mafia boss's children. Her family cut ties immediately. Her father, a senator with presidential ambitions, released a statement condemning her actions and pledging full cooperation with investigators. Her mother didn't release a statement at all. She just changed her last name and moved to Europe. The clinic that had performed the unauthorized procedure on Kairo lost its license. 3 doctors were arrested. The nurses who'd taken bribes were fired and charged. Selene's assistant flipped on her within 48 hours, handing over emails, text messages, and recorded phone calls that painted a picture of systematic abuse spanning years. And through it all, Selene screamed. In her jail cell, during her arraignment, when the judge denied bail because she was considered a flight risk. She screamed that she'd been framed, that Kairo had manipulated everyone, that Rafe would come to his senses and rescue her. He didn't. Rafe stood in his office, watching the news coverage on mute. His phone buzzed constantly, reporters wanting comments, old associates looking for gossip, politicians suddenly concerned about their connections to the Hart family. He ignored all of it. Behind him, Dante cleared his throat. The federal prosecutor called. They're moving forward with multiple charges. Medical coercion, bribery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. They're talking 15 to 20 years minimum. Rafe nodded without turning around. Good. There's more, Dante hesitated. Selene's lawyer is trying to negotiate a deal. They want to argue diminished capacity, claim she was acting out of love, that she truly believed she was protecting you. Rafe's jaw tightened. Love doesn't threaten, love doesn't steal. Love doesn't destroy someone's voice and call it protection. I know, but juries can be unpredictable. They might buy it. Then make sure they don't. Rafe turned to face Dante. I want every piece of evidence presented. Every email, every payment, every lie. I want the world to see exactly who Selene Hart is. Dante nodded. Consider it done. After he left, Rafe stood alone in his office, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 years ago, he would have handled this differently, violently, permanently. But he wasn't that man anymore. Kairo had changed him. Fatherhood had changed him. The weight of almost losing everything that mattered had changed him. Now he understood that some punishments were worse than death. Exposure, shame, watching everything you built crumble while the world cheered. That was justice. The office door opened quietly. Rafe turned, expecting Dante with more updates. But it was Kairo. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on his belly, the other holding his phone. He looked healthier than he had 3 weeks ago, still tired, but the fear had faded from his eyes. He typed quickly and held up the screen. The triplets are asleep. Thought you might want a break. Rafe crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Kairo gently into his arms, careful of the belly between them. Kairo melted against him, his head resting on Rafe's shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, no words needed, just presence, just breath, just the steady rhythm of 2 hearts learning to beat in sync again. Rafe pulled back slightly and looked down at Kairo's face. How are you feeling? Kairo's expression shifted. His hand moved to his belly, pressing gently. Then his eyes went wide. His phone dropped from his other hand, clattering to the floor. Rafe's heart stopped. What's wrong? Kairo's hand gripped Rafe's arm hard, his mouth opened in a silent gasp. Then water pooled on the floor beneath him. Rafe's brain took half a second to catch up. Labor. 6 weeks early. Will the baby survive, and can Kairo endure one more fight? The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking heartbeats and contractions, and every fluctuation that could mean disaster. Kairo lay in the bed, his face covered in sweat, his hand gripping Rafe's with enough force to leave marks. He couldn't scream, couldn't cry out, couldn't do any of the things that made labor bearable. He could only breathe and endure, and hope his body knew what to do. Rafe stayed beside him through every contraction, whispering words Kairo couldn't hear over the roaring in his own head. The doctors had explained the risks. 6 weeks early meant underdeveloped lungs, low birth weight, potential complications. But the baby was coming whether they were ready or not. Hours blurred together, pain stacked on pain. Kairo's silent suffering filled the room louder than any screaming could have. And then, finally, a cry. Small, weak, but alive. The doctor held up a tiny body, all wrinkled skin and flailing limbs. It's a girl, she said, smiling behind her mask. Kairo's head fell back against the pillows, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave. Rafe stared at the baby, his daughter, being cleaned and weighed and examined by nurses who moved with practiced efficiency. 4 pounds 6 ounces, small but fighting. Just like her father. They placed her in Kairo's arms carefully, monitoring equipment still attached, but she was breathing. Pink, perfect. Kairo looked down at her with tears streaming down his face. Rafe leaned in close, one arm wrapped around both of them. She's beautiful. Kairo's hand trembled as he touched the baby's cheek, so soft, so fragile, so impossibly precious. He looked up at Rafe, eyes full of questions. Rafe understood. Amara, he said quietly, it means grace, eternal, unfading. Kairo's lips trembled, then he nodded. Amara. The baby who survived against the odds. Just like all of them. 6 months passed. The estate had transformed into something lived in and loved. Toys scattered across floors, bottles drying in the kitchen. Laughter, real, unguarded laughter, filling rooms that used to echo with silence. Malik, Cherie, and Jalen were walking now, stumbling, really, falling and getting back up with the determination of tiny warriors. Amara was thriving, still small but growing stronger every day. And Kairo was healing. Not completely, probably never completely, Some wounds didn't close all the way. But he was learning to trust again, learning to believe that safety could last longer than a moment, learning that love didn't always come with conditions. Rafe had kept every promise. The estate was in Kairo's name, the bank accounts were accessible, the security team answered to Kairo first, Rafe second. And most importantly, Rafe had learned Kairo's silence. He'd learned the difference between a nod that meant yes and a nod that meant I'm too tired to argue. He'd learned to read micro-expressions, hand gestures, the way Kairo's shoulders tensed when he was overwhelmed. He'd learned that love didn't require sound to be heard. On a bright Saturday morning, they returned to the park where everything had changed. The same brick paths, the same oak trees, the same benches where Kairo had stood 6 months ago with nothing but fear and desperation. But now Rafe pushed the stroller with 4 children instead of 3. Now Kairo walked beside him without flinching at every sound. Now they looked like what they actually were, a family that had survived and chosen each other anyway. They stopped at the same bench. Rafe sat down first, then pulled Kairo gently beside him. The triplets played nearby on a blanket, supervised by the security team that always stayed close but never crowded. Amara slept in the stroller, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. Kairo leaned against Rafe's shoulder, his hand resting in Rafe's palm. Rafe squeezed gently and whispered the words he'd been saving for this moment. You were never the Omega mistake, you were always my home. Kairo's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears now, healing ones, grateful ones. He pulled out his phone and typed slowly. And you're mine, finally. Rafe leaned down and kissed his forehead, lingering there like a promise. Around them the park continued its peaceful rhythm. Joggers passed, dogs barked, children laughed. And for the first time in 3 years, Kairo felt like he belonged in a world that had tried so hard to erase him. The past couldn't be rewritten, the scars wouldn't disappear. Selene would spend the next 2 decades in prison, but her damage was permanent. But damage didn't mean destroyed. And survival could become more than just existing, it could become living. Kairo squeezed Rafe's hand tighter. A wordless answer. A promise. A love that survived silence, betrayal, and 3 years of separation. And still won. If this story moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter of hope, justice, and love that refuses to break. Drop a comment and share how this story inspired you. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's build a community that believes in second chances and the power of fighting for what matters most.